Next item on the agenda is the Television Center and Government Channel report by Mr. Gisler.
Woohoo! I will try to make this brief, however, I do have a lot to talk about. It is third quarter report time, it's quarterly report time, and your packet, excuse me.
I don't think you
vote
voted.
on accepting the contract as amended made? We don't.
Yes.
Recall.
Yes.
It was?
The motion was passed,
okay.
the amendment was passed, and the proposal itself was passed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Y'all didn't need any more information.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we got that.
If y'all don't need more, okay.
Okay. I did include some numbers in your information packet regarding our performance, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on them. Just basically to point out that in terms of our programs produced and telecast, we are slightly over what we originally anticipated to be what we wanted to do, if I'm reading my numbers correctly, and I hope I entered them all correctly. Both in the quarter and year to date, with again the exception of internal training and communications programs, and that is because two reasons. One, we haven't had a significant number of requests to do internal productions, internal only, and then we've been focusing on maintaining our meeting production levels. And I can also tell you that we are almost finished with our VHS to DVD archive transfer project, which is great. And I also want to make a special note to commend Fru Gallagher for taking that project on and doing a great job in finding things. Yep. And she has found some ways to make it even more efficient in terms of storage and that whole process. So, job well done for Fru on that. Some of the highlights in the third quarter for the government channel and the television center as well. As you know, I combine these two together in my role as the manager of the television center and the government channel operation. From an administrative standpoint, of course, we did the third quarter report. If you have any other questions on that, feel free to ask. We responded to several FOIA requests in the third quarter. And we also worked very closely with your media to develop this public access contract that we just spent so much time talking about. And also working closely with the city attorney and also having conversations with Ms. Foraker from AT&T to help contribute how we were able to with the AT&T agreement, which was great. In terms of things from a technology standpoint, as I've been reporting to you, we are wanting to create some redundancy and some disaster recovery plans for our telecasting for both channels. We're successful in that. We have installed a new channel controller for the public access channel, and now both channels are independently controlled off of two different boxes, which gives us the capability of recovery. If one of those controllers goes south on us, we can move the affected channel to the other controller temporarily, maintain telecasting of our programming until we can get it fixed. So that's a good thing to have done. In the first part of October, as I said last month, there was an e-waste roundup. The television center had been, for unknown reasons, had been collecting equipment and not disposing of it. It had just been being collected and not being disposed of over many, many, many years. There were lots and lots of pieces of equipment that we finally were able to dispose of for free, no cost to the city through the e-waste roundup. I think we ended up disposing of, there were some pieces of equipment that I saw that had been manufactured over 20 years ago that was still there. We weren't using it. It wasn't usable in another situation. I think we disposed of 3 pallets worth of electronic equipment that didn't have any more use. And now we have more space. It's cleaner. It's a much more it's a much more usable space for our public and for our staff. We've also implemented several software and firmware updates for our technology. That's just one of the things that we do on a regular basis. And because you will probably see this and or hear about it, we've also implemented a procedure where once a month, on the first Monday of the month, we will be off the air from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. in the afternoons. And what that will do is that will allow us to do maintenance and repairs if necessary, but basically maintenance and updates and things on our telecast controllers. We have to take them down. We have to stop our programming to do those. But we're going to do it on a regular schedule, first Monday of the month from 1 to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. From a building standpoint in the television center itself, I am very, very pleased to announce that we have, that our building services division has completed a remodel of our facility. It's not a complete remodel, but as we go forward and constantly trying to find ways that will enhance our services for our public users and also make it a nicer, more supportive environment for our staff, we have taken the space that's the classroom, and it is just the classroom now. It is no longer the classroom and the break room and the storage room and all of this stuff. It is just for the classroom. And so classes won't be interrupted anymore. We've created a very usable, secure storage area for our public access equipment, field equipment, just like we have for government channel equipment. And we've created a new break area that has a water sink, small refrigerator, coffee maker, nice counter. It's tucked away on a wall. And we've had positive comments about what we've done at the television center. The building services department did a tremendous job. I encourage you all to come down and look at it. I think you'll really enjoy it and see what we've done. We've approved some new signage for the front of the building, which is in the process of being created right now. If you go down to Rock Street and Church, you'll see on the district court building and the police department three-dimensional silver letters. And for example, on the front of the police department, it says City of Fayetteville Police Department, 100 West Rock Street. On the front of our building, it will look the same. It will say City of Fayetteville Television Center, 101 West Rock Street. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is because it will make our signage on our building more consistent with other facilities. I don't have the design with me to show you because I want you to see it when it's on the building, but we'll have a painted sign that will be rather large. If you see the front of the building and you see where the blue and white sign is on the left now, that will come down and the three-dimensional letters will go there. On the other side of the building, between the two vertical windows, will be a painted sign that has the Fayetteville logo, the public access, it'll say Fayetteville Public Access Television, that logo, and the government channel logo up there. So it will be very identifiable, very clean, very modern, and I think very, very attractive for the public to see. So we're excited about that, and I'm going to encourage you to come down and see that when you can. I think that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Spencer?
One question on the maintenance window. That's going to be the first Monday of each month from 1 to 2 p.m. Will you be communicating that with the public in advance? Is there a communication plan behind that so they know?
Yeah. What we plan to do is we won't be in black.
Okay.
We will be able to put up a full screen graphic that says our programming is temporarily suspended for maintenance and upgrades. We will resume our programming at 2 p.m. Basically something like that. So no, it won't be just as, someone tune in and, oh, there's nothing there. So
okay.
We will have something up there. We just have to take the actual video programming, the video controllers down offline to do that.
And another point of information, we were talking a lot about the software and hardware updates that you do. Do you receive support from the IT department of Fayetteville, or do you handle everything yourself?
We handle 97.5% of our stuff. A lot of those software and firmware updates are for dedicated pieces of video production equipment, so they're not IT supported.
Okay.
Ms. Smith, do you have it?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things. When Fritz was talking about disposing of a lot of equipment, I do want you to know that that was a program. All of that equipment was recycled. And so we're very proud of that helps regenerate and can be turned into some other things. Also, when he was talking about the the work that was done in the facility to make the new break room and also the new storage area that's more secure. There's a lot of recycling, I think, that went on there too, and it's really exciting. They were showing it to me today, and just making the old cabinets and then retrofitting and then moving them over, and the one door that had to be flipped the other way so it could actually be reused in certain ways, and a drawer that was at the bottom at the top. So that was really exciting. Also on the sign of the building, with our logo, as you know, it also has accessfayetteville.org, so it'll have the city's website. And since we're streaming, we have so much information on there. We're really trying to get the public to start looking at the website, because it really is that award-winning, one of the best in the nation. And on that note, let me just add, and a lot of people don't know this, and the mayor hasn't had a chance to announce it yet, but I think it's appropriate with this group and many of the things that y'all have done, that the city of Fayetteville was notified. We've tried for this award. You know, we were hoping years after years after years that we would get it, but we were recognized just recently as, we were told about it, the award comes eventually, that we are number 7 in the entire nation as a digital city. It is absolutely huge. Yeah. It's a really, really big award, and that highlights those cities, particularly the local government, that have advanced so far in their digital capabilities and the things they're doing. And I give a big props to Don Marr, who really sat over that and just really started pulling all this stuff together.
Okay.
That's all.
Any other comments, questions? I guess Mr. Hilton has left the building and will not make his comments on the government channel. So we'll move into the public access television report from Ms. Shep.
We have actually it's our time for our quarterly report. I'll just briefly go over pull out a few highlights for you because you have the full report in front of you. Prior to that, I want to say that as I left the television center to come here, there were 4 people at the orientation. We've had a lot of calls and activity from people using the facility based on the mailing they received in their water bill. Anecdotally, I have a lot of stories I could tell about people mentioning it to me, you know, who I just happened to run into, who liked it and saw it. I did a quick poll of those participating in the orientation, and 3 of them had heard about it for the first time ever out of their water bill. And one was had a friend who was a producer there. So I think the latter is typically how people learned about it in the past, is just they knew somebody who already knew about it. And our efforts from here on forward are to really make it something that's widely known. One of the other things we've started doing is flyer distribution. I brought one for each of you to take to your lovely flyer place of choice. If you would like to help us promote the television, public access television. We have that at the Senior Center, Workforce Services. We see, especially Workforce Services, folks who have some extra time and are wanting to learn a skill for free. I will say that the 3 people who learned about it through the water bill commented on it being free, and that it was something they'd always wanted to do and didn't know that it was possible that you could do something like that. So I'm very proud of that, and as we move forward, looking forward, we're also building a Facebook page. I should say my board members and staff are building a Facebook page. I still need to join the Facebook world. Going to the highlights, we met our contractual obligation again in the 3rd quarter. Not without challenges. Once again, we did some test out sessions with Fayetteville High School students. Peggy James, I want to give kudos to her, who is the instructor there and also a board member, for making that happen. But we did end the 3rd quarter to above our contractual quota. At this time, at the 3rd quarter of 2010, there had been 38 total trainings done at the television facility. This year, there were 209 trainings or workshop opportunities for Fayetteville residents at the end of the 3rd quarter. 23 certified producers for all of last year, but only 14 candidate producers for all of 2010. To date, in 2011, we have 43 candidate producers at this point in time. So we had a good increase in class participants. If you look on page 2, you want to look at each of these charts before you, that down the 3rd quarter, you'll see class participation was up to 67 for the 3rd quarter versus 43 and 41. The number of new candidate producers was the highest ever at 17 versus 15 and 11. And the number of program requesters by ward our total was up from 89 to 66 in the last quarter. One of the other things I'm really excited to say that I think we've been really absolutely pinned to getting the word out through the mailing is JR, our Director of Education, said as of tonight we will have 5 candidate producers already in the 4th quarter. That's not even the end of the first month, and this is the first time, I will say, that I feel a sense of relief, and I'm not worried about that till the very end. Yeah. So I think our hope, our hypotheses that if we get things right and really work hard to create a good product and make it free and user-friendly, and then we get the word out, if we build it, they will come. Well, now we're telling people about it, and it seems to be that they are coming, so I'm excited about that. If you look at one of the things that Flint Woods, our fabulous technical specialist, did as we're planning for next year and wanting to make sure we're doing the best job possible. I didn't bore you with all these fabulous charts, which I don't find boring at all, but he did an in-depth analysis of usage of the public access facility by day, by type of usage, whether studio, edit bays, by hour of each day. And I just included the overall graph that he put together here, so that as we move into 2012, we will set new operating hours that really match when the facility is being used. We're really excited about that. Organizationally, I think I did mention earlier, your media is also thriving. We just got a $7,500 grant from the Fred Dara Foundation to fund a project called Into Focus, empowering LGBT and Latino youth through the art of digital storytelling. And I have a meeting next week in Little Rock with the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation in hopes that they will also do significant funding of that project. Monday, 2 of my board members and a Fayetteville resident are meeting at the high school to look at possible educational grant opportunities for the Fayetteville public access side of what we do. So we're continuing to look for ways that we can expand and grow both in our services to you and in our services to the public as your media. Class participation, again, in the 3rd quarter, things are looking up. We had 71 participants versus 43 in the 2 previous quarters. And the thing that I love to continue to see stay consistent is only 11 no-shows or cancellations versus the previous 2. At the bottom of that page, you'll see the numbers for the year so far in new trainees, new certified producers, new candidate producers, and new outside producers. And again, the 3rd quarter, pardon my language, but we rocked it. Over the 2nd quarter, but still not as good as the 1st quarter. So things are looking up. We're continuing to be consistent. Even as far as on page 6, you'll see the number of short takers increased to 35, people who taped a short take. And that was without any of our satellite short take opportunities at the market or an event in Fayetteville. So again, that was directly from people seeing it in the mailing that we did. I think that's all I'm sure I get far more excited about these numbers than you all do, but it's exciting what's happening there. We're seeing an increase. We love the new changes to the facility. The contract negotiations have been very productive, and we look forward to continuing to serve you.
I think you've just done a fantastic job this year.
Specifically commend both of you for outstanding work. It's just, I've been involved in public access and aware of the government channel for decades, and it's never been this good, ever.
Thank you.
Just wonderful. Plus, with these 3rd quarter reports, maybe we can just adopt and make our report to the city council.
Do your reports make it to the city council any other way?
I think it's my understanding that mid-year I did a specific report to the city council. That's the first time that had ever been done. I could be wrong because I've only been doing this a short while. And at the end of the year, I will provide a sort of Reader's Digest version of these numbers to the city council. I think it's important that they see their return on investment.
Absolutely.
So, but they do not see these.
Okay. I'll be preparing 3rd quarter report, and we'll include both of y'all's in that.
Okay, great.
That's great.
Yeah, we definitely want them to know how well you're doing as the year goes on.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would offer to you is for consideration, if you want to, is we certainly can edit a segment of this meeting, if you want to include any of the video of this meeting, of these reports and stuff to include, we can do that. I mean, that's one of the things that I mean, we would be glad. If you think it would help communicate the reporting for the telecom board to the city council, if you think it would be helpful for them to see Ms. Shelley actually presenting part of this report to the telecom board, by all means, let us know, and we will.
I bet they all watch it.
Oh yeah.
We have demand, on demand, telecom on demand.
Okay, I'll figure out how we're gonna do that report, probably in the next few days.
Okay.
So, moving on from there, unless there are any other, I'm sorry, Ms. Smith.
Right, quick comment. I will say, just to follow up on Ann, that it was just so exciting to be, and I told her about this, and I know she does have so many stories like this, but it was just so nice as a communication director for the city, being a liaison for the city at an event or a meeting at the university to plan some Veterans Day type things one evening, that down at the end of the table there was a woman who had that mail out on the materials on her desk, that she brought that, you know, as something to tell them this is something we can do. But also when you have a United States Senator's representative in the room telling people there a big way to do this is go to public access television and do a short take. To actually have it from that congressional representative saying that, I just think that I mean, it really is filtering out there. It's the education level that we've never had before, so thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to the education channel report, but I don't see anybody here for that.
Point of
Yes, sir.
I believe they're required only to make an annual report, and we're just fortunate if they want us to show up and talk to us. Is that right?
We were lucky enough to have Fritz's daughter Elise with us at the last meeting, and we appreciate her being here and look forward to any reports that the Education Channel provides in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear from the students what they're doing, but I mean, they don't get the merits if they don't show up.
That's true. All right, on to point 6, which is a report from the ad hoc committee that was chaired by Mr. Smith to review the existing Telecommunications Board ordinance. Mr. Smith.
Two things to report from the committee. And let me take them in reverse order that they're on the agenda item. First is the board had referred complaint, I think it was complaint number 1 out of 3.
The request.
Yes, number 1, yes.
That Mr. Bemis had submitted. And generally, there was sort of like a wind-up before the pitch. He said that the application and nominating process of City Council has failed to produce a wide range of volunteer board members and resources required to make timely decisions and recommendations under the current ordinance. He said, second, that city staff is performing a greater role in preparing documents to support and assist this dysfunctional board members than he thinks is appropriate. Third, that there's a high turnover in board membership and officers and poor attendance records by members of the board. That the board members have violated the state's Freedom of Information Act by discussing issues by email, and that records of the board and its committee meetings have been poorly maintained. And finally, that the board has responded to few citizen requests and complaints and has made few recommendations to the council since 2006. Specifically, he requests that the full board join with the city staff and city council in a team effort to inventory the community's telecommunication needs and jointly update the board's administrative rules and the telecommunication ordinance. Our committee response to this is that the appointment of the committee to review the existing ordinance and considering the complaint with Mr. Bemis. We're prepared to make recommendations for changes in existing telecommunication ordinance that will allow the board to better meet its responsibilities. and that we found this to be the appropriate response to Mr. Bemis's complaint. That is complaint number 1 out of 3 from that meeting, and recommend that the board take no further action on the complaint.
Is that a motion?
That's a report. I move that it be accepted and complaint number 1 be disposed of as without needing further attention from the board.
Is that for the reasons that you had outlined in
It is.
that email?
We'll
Okay.
attach this to it.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion from the board? If there's no discussion, any discussion from the public? Mr. Bemis.
Thank you. Thank you all for hearing me at the subcommittee. I've sent you my response by email, but the biggest point I'd like to get clarified is that every one of my requests for service were based on the board's own findings at a 2009 forum and brainstorming session. I'd like to read 4 or 5 of those. Y'all have seen them. If you've read them, I don't know. I've tried to put those before the board as representing what the board has said they ought to do, that they were going to do. Examples, out of that, there were 7 takeaways that Mr. Eilers called them. This is from the board. There was frustration and many comments at the meeting that progress had not been made on the telecom board objectives and that much discussion relates to interpretation of the ordinance. Now, that's not me saying that. I tried to bring that into my request for service. I'd like to see that done, and I think Mr. Smith's group will push forward on the ordinance. I'm not sure it's going in the direction I'd like, but at least they're talking about it. It seems timely to engage the city clerk and city attorney in answering the outstanding questions of interpretation so the board can move forward with clarity. I think you're trying to do that to clarify what this ambiguous ordinance means. We've been trying to do that for a long, long time. The 4th point he raises, many comments were that the telecom board is not viewed as an entity and is losing members as an active entity and is losing members and community support. Y'all recommended taking these 3 steps. Define the telecom board's relationship with the new council and administration. This was in 2009. You've got a newer council now. You've got 5 newer members since this, since 2009. Move forward on the 8 topics listed in item 1. They're listed in the actual brainstorming report, and address open items of interpretations. Make a decision and move forward. I think the subcommittee is attempting to do that, and I hope they'll get a thorough review by the council. Number 5 was there was an agreement that the role of the telecom board is to strengthen or streamline government and citizens' access to information. This is again what the board itself said. In that regard, the board should review the transition team. This is what was active at the time for the city. Findings on communications and seek a place at the table as the administration formulates a communications plan. I hope that we get a plan and a budget and an organizational chart out of what you're coming up with for the ordinance. That's what I understand the board's job to be. The topic of new communications resources was an important topic. It appears there's an opportunity for the telecom board to engage citizens, U of A students, and communications professionals to research immediate and long range of options that will help Fayetteville maintain an exemplary communication model. At the time, you were talking about doing a communication audit, an inventory of what you have and what will be needed for the next part of this next decade. We have done a very lousy job of planning. Not this group, y'all weren't here, but in the past, we have not ever had a design and planning study for communications in Fayetteville, even for the 2025, 2030 plan, whatever. Policy opportunities regarding licensing models I suppose that as for the new technology, as well as for the AT&T and Cox contracts and whatever they're going to come up with next. And communications consistency in city government. This means, I'm not sure what that means. It means how are we looking at the new media, in my view. What in the world are we going to do with what's coming down the pipe? It's not just television anymore, folks. It's in fact, that's a model is pretty soon going to be an obsolete one. I believe Mr. Gisler said at the last meeting that he had seen a report that in the next 10 years, the television as we know it, on the channels and all, will be a thing of the past because of the new models that are coming down the pipe. And how do we plan for that? It's not, I'm not bringing this stuff to you, I'm not making it up. It's out there being discussed. You're fortunate to be able to even talk to AT&T tonight because in many states, they're moving to a state level discussion that y'all had tonight. There will be one contract at the state level. Anyway, those are things that need to be anticipated. And to develop a communication plan. Where do you want to be in 2020? Where does this board want to be? What do you want to be? Do you have some grasp of what the future is going to be for something that we're calling television? Some people call it telecommuting now. In any event, how do the citizens become involved more and more in that process? They're taking to the streets with their tweets and their blogs and their wikis, which are outside y'all's purview right now, but how do you help the citizenry understand what that's doing to this city and to our country? You have a job there. As I see it, who else is going to do that job? Okay, that's the end of that group. I'm going to declare victory and move to higher ground. I will be reaching you through my wiki and blog, and I hope to help you build something for Northwest Arkansas. We've lost the Jones Center this last month. Folks, that's a heck of an opportunity. If you want to band with other folks and see if you can't come up with something that will strengthen our whole area of the state. It could be done if this is the only opportunity at franchise time that you folks have an opportunity to put out your hand and say, folks, we've given you a wonderful opportunity to make some money. If I have it right, you get 5% of the money that's coming in from the profits from AT&T and Cox. You don't get anything from the satellites. You don't get anything from the wireless. But from those two alone, you're going to get close to $1 million this year. When the city got the PEG channels, they also got the PEG Center. They got $300 and something thousand for that. You can ask for that and additional bandwidth at franchise time. That's the only time you get to ask for it, and the only time you really have a shot at changing the basic tier on the channels. Now, and when you contract with Cox, we have a man who's very familiar with this, I think of Mr. Spearman, who has worked with AT&T. Other places in the country are asking for bandwidth instead of money. Some of them are getting money up front out of the franchise renewals. So that's the kind of forward thinking. I think, what do you want? That's what I like to see the board come up with. And I think you'll get a lot of support from the city, as you did in 2003 with our then alderman, Lionel Jordan and Don Marr. They did a beautiful job of bringing the council and the public together and have them do the planning and design work. It's been 8 years. We brought in the internet protocol, and we brought in Wi-Fi for the city and a whole bunch of other things that didn't even exist back then. What's it going to be 10 years from now? That's my speech. But I think it's very important that you look at not just the tremendous amount of time that you folks are spending in this sort of thing. It's volunteer time. I think we have to have a stronger strategy that will take advantage of the expertise in town, like they did in 2003. We had folks from the university, the school system, the business community working with you. You bring them in and get some help on the telecommunication, the young folks, the people in school, the people in the university. Anyhow, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bemis. Any further discussion from the board?
I'd just like to thank Mr. Bemis for his interest and enthusiasm in telecommunication issues.
Thank you.
Mr. Hilton,
Brief question, have we already covered 6?
we're on 6.
Oh, we're on 6. I ducked out for a little bit. So.
With no further discussion,
I would like to make a comment then,
yes, sir.
just a brief comment about one or two things that Mr. Bemis said. He talked about a lot of different kinds of technology, a lot of it not having anything to do with cable and television, turning into something else, into different types of technological ways of delivering communication. And that's the major reason why the telecommunications ordinance was changed from a cable board to a telecommunications ordinance, and why the definition that apparently has been recommended to delete from the ordinance, why that definition was put in there and included so many different kinds of technologies, so that this board could be innovative and look at all the different possibilities and make recommendations, not necessarily from the standpoint of knowing how in detail those technologies work, but more into how those technologies could be used, what purpose, and what content to deliver. And so, saying that, I don't see why you would want to remove that particular definition of telecommunication infrastructure. It's meant to be broad.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. If no further discussion, we'll move into a vote. The motion for the board is to find that complaint number 1 by Mr. Bemis is without merit and that the board will take no further action. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. We'll move into Mr. Smith's second part of this
Okay,
report.
the second part is the ad hoc committee to review the Telecommunications Board ordinance. On number 6, to just make one correction on here where it says Title 3, Chapter 33, it should then say Article 9 rather than Chapter 9 of the City Code. We had 2 very productive meetings and went through both in considering Mr. Bemis's complaint and other information available to us. I would like to move that we approve this draft and submit it to the city attorney for review.
Does everybody have a copy of that draft?
It's it's on the notice that was sent out.
Okay.
And then I'd like to go through it and explain or speak in favor of the motion.
I'll second
If
that.
it's okay.
Mr. Smith?
Beginning on what says Exhibit A, which is the content of the current ordinance. On the first page, there are 2 changes we recommend. One is under public access channels, that we insert the word Fayetteville. So it would read, public access channels provide a forum for Fayetteville residents to express themselves. That's consistent with the contract and the city council's position that they're using our limited funds to serve the residents of Fayetteville rather than the greater diaspora. And deleting section 4, which is an extended discussion of telecommunication infrastructure that includes software and satellite technology and things that are, as Mr. Bemis pointed out, beyond the capacity of the people who get appointed to these boards, and the city spends tens of thousands of dollars on IT consulting contracts rather than expected to come from a city board. But I'll speak about those 3. There's 3 deletions like that I'll speak to at the end. But let me move quickly through this. I know the Cardinals are thinking about this as well. On page what would be page 4 of the Exhibit A. Delete the section that says we would make the studies of the infrastructure and make recommendations for funding of the city's telecommunication infrastructure, and renumber there. In Part B on that same page, the language originally said oversee, and there was a good deal of confusion on that. Apparently, in the past, board members had thought that meant they sort of had some responsibility to manage these things. The city attorney's opinions made that pretty clear that wasn't the case. So in both number 1 and 2 would substitute the words regularly review the administration. There was another complaint that had been raised that we were getting too much help from the city staff, and they weren't specifically authorized to help us in developing policies and things. So it would insert the words where now it says the Telecommunications Board shall facilitate the creation of policies. My reading of that would be to work with staff and do it, but that wasn't clear to everyone, so it inserts that the board shall work with city staff to facilitate the creation of policies. And then there was sort of some duplicate language there. Section 4 had also talked about contract compliance, so we combined 3 and 4 and then renumbered those. On what is now number 3, facilitate dispute resolution concerning PEG channels. To track complaints filed by Fayetteville residents, to assure that telecommunications franchisees and access providers are responding to. Telecommunication providers was so broad that it would appear to be that we should have a responsibility if somebody's having a problem with their cell phone, that we should go talk to Cricket about it or whoever the telecommunication provider was. And throughout this ordinance it said citizens in many cases, and Fayetteville has a number of residents who are not citizens. We have a large international community university, we have a large workforce that has green cards, we have other people who are residents of Fayetteville but are not citizens. We have a number of university students who may be registered to vote in other counties, but they reside here and subscribe to cable. But so substituting their complaints filed by Fayetteville residents to expand that, and also to make clear that we're not going to track complaints by people from Utah who don't like our program and the way things are going. So it's just our responsibilities to Fayetteville residents. Section 6 had required us to do a survey of expending digital capacity and make recommendations and a plan and all that, again, which are beyond the board's ability for a number of reasons. In the new number 6, it'd be called telecommunications franchisee. A recommendation of replacing the cable telecommunications franchisee instead of provider on that. And I believe those are all the changes we recommended. The reason this actually reduces the scope of this, the authority of the Telecommunication Board, and that is the purpose of this. For the last 3 years, Mr. Bemis has diligently brought to our attention the failings of this board to do everything that's required in the 2003 ordinance. That since that time, city finances have taken a nosedive, as all public funding has. The city budget that's being proposed for next year is even less than the city budget was in 2008. The number of staff people presently working for the city is about 3% less, I think, than it was in 2008. So the city is not going to increase funding or provide additional staff people in this area to do these things. And what we need to do is make sure that the ordinance reflects the reality, and if that changes in the future, someone can do it. Otherwise, we're always going to be out of compliance. And the board has, I mean, I don't think it's through any lack of effort, but Mr. Hilton testified before the city council that there was so much work to be done that members of this board ought to be paid half as much as the city council, because it took so much time to do all that work. And you can see that during the 2 years that Mr. Shepard was chairman, he was so busy trying to pursue all the other requirements that we didn't even do the most basic things like presenting quarterly and annual reports to the city council to advise them as we're required to do. So what this does is try to make it a manageable exercise for a city volunteer board that meets within the city's budget and personnel requirements. Something that we can do and do well, and it also maintains sort of the essential function of why a telecommunication board is needed. It'd be nice if we could dream with the dreamers at the FCC and work in all the digital labs all over the country, but we can't. But what we can do is make sure that our PEG channels operate fully, that they're absolutely free, that they're open to our citizens, that there's no complaints, that there's no censorship, and it protects the city council from something that it can't do, which is deciding content of those information. I think these changes in the ordinance will make it where a citizen board can perform those duties. And I recommend that we adopt it and submit it to the city attorney for review.
Any discussion from the board? Any discussion from the public or the staff? If not, Mr. Hilton.
I just want to make one brief remark. There's really no reason in the world to turn this ordinance into such a narrow scope. You can still consider the possibilities without having to worry about, are you doing your duty? It needs to be left open because, as several people have already alluded to, television is merging with the other media. So leave it open to possibilities of being creative and innovative. That's all I'm saying. And word it so that if you don't consider absolutely everything, especially the nitty-gritty of the technology, you still won't be not doing your duty. Just leave the possibility there. Just wiping out all these other possibilities, I don't think is a good solution. It's a way to be narrow. It's a way to be not progressive. At one time, this city had an exemplary telecom board and government channel policy, and we've been going backwards. We've been going backwards.
I'd like to respond to that.
Mr. Smith?
One of the reasons that there's been a high turnover on this board has been because people are frustrated with the process, that almost all the time has been spent listening to complaints about what the board hadn't done in meeting their requirements under this ordinance. And it'll continue if we leave it open like that. There'll be complaints. We'll spend every meeting here listening to complaints that, well, you haven't done the digital survey, you haven't done this. And we can't do that, and let's try to be realistic about this. This is not a dream, this is a practical part of city government. If sometime that people have the time and the resources and the money in the future that we can do those things, I would make the motion that we do them.
Any further discussion? Mr. Gisler?
I would like to thank the committee's work that they did on looking at the ordinance. As the city's designated liaison, city staff liaison for the Telecommunications Board, I think that these revisions will make things much more workable for this board. And from staff perspective, my staff perspective, I support these changes. One comment that I had, and I noticed that, Mr. Smith, there's been several times when in some of the changes that you made, and also, and I apologize for not bringing this up earlier, but it kind of formulated tonight while I was going through some of this, and that is some of your comments about the telecommunications providers and how broad that is, and looking at how the ordinance is being more narrowly focused on the operations of the PEG channels and making sure that our citizens are receiving the services in which that they need and they've agreed to want to provide. Would it be more effective to change telecommunications providers or telecommunications franchisees and be more descriptive if we change that to read video services providers, which is how we refer to it in the public access services contract? How we refer to Cox Communications, AT&T, or anybody else who might be providing PEG access or anything like that is as video services providers. That was just
Is that a term of art? Or would that include also people that go around making YouTubes and... I mean, say I come in and say, hey, I'm going to make me a YouTube on this. I'm a video service provider. Or is it a specific term of art that has been interpreted to include just the things we want to include?
I believe from our perspective and what we did with the public access services contract is that it meets what you just referred to.
So if we put back in a definitional section
that
define what a video services
provider would be, or a franchise. I was just trying to make a suggestion that might help clear up some of that vagueness of telecommunications, because I know that's a very broad term.
Perhaps the city attorney would advise us what he comes
I hope so.
Well, we'll say the city attorney did advise when the question was asked, would franchisee be interpreted in that way, even though AT&T was not, and he said yes, it would.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but could need a definition section. He could recommend this.
Yeah.
If there's no further discussion, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor of adopting the changes that were recommended by the subcommittee and forwarding them to the city attorney for review, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. We will move into number 7, which was, at my request, the staff's report detailing the amount of time that has been spent responding and all the other things that go along with it to the complaints that were submitted by Mr. Bemis since the administrative rules were changed 2 months ago. By my estimate, about 40 work days in that period. Ms. Smith, did you want to? It's the last page in my report.
Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. We were asked to come up with these hours, so I went to, the various individuals upon which would do diligent work on this. There are people like Julie McQuaid, our community outreach coordinator, and others who are copied on the emails, and we know that they're spending time reading it, but I didn't include them in this. Pretty much it just lays out how Fritz, Ann, myself, the city attorney's office, just a few minutes in there, the city clerk's office, and I think this is the one where, on the third paragraph, if you'll see it, I put last 2 years related to this incident. Should be just 2 months, and as you know, it just looks at the last 2 months dealing with this complaint, and it's conservatively estimated as 67 hours spent.
About 8 full days of an imaginary staff member's time. Any comments from the board? All right. I didn't really have anything that particularly needed to be done, but I was curious as to what time.
Was any of these requests from residents of Fayetteville?
No.
This is just from Mr. Bemis.
Oh,
All right. Mr. Bemis?
Briefly, as a lectured earlier, all of my requests stem from this board. They're not my requests. They are requests for services that I expected the board to perform over the last 3 years. They're not events that occurred over the last 2 months. My requests cover years because you never had a complaint process. I hope you don't forget that. Everything that I've asked for is a backlog of what this board, not you all, you weren't here. There's not a person on this board except Mr. Shepherd, who was here in June of last year when I first filed a complaint. There were, in 2009, Ms. Smith, Mr. Gisler were not here for the brainstorming, and this is stuff that has happened that you folks picked up a very dirty stick and are trying to run with it. And I applaud you for trying, but please don't make me the heavy as the person who is complaining in a 2-month period and giving you 60-something hours of work. This is because the previous boards did not do their work and that you've changed. I don't even talk to the same people over the last months at each board meeting. That you give me a moving target to deal with in terms of providing information to the board. That's my point. Do not make me the heavy when it's the board itself, not you all. The board system is not performing. That was one of my complaints. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just say, you know, and that's one thing, like coming to the board and making comments and asking action there. Do know that it is a priority of this administration that we are very customer friendly, and in terms of if somebody contacts the city and they say, I want the following documents, our goal is as staff, we try to get those within 1 day. If somebody says, hey, can you find what district I live in, we'll try to get that to them immediately. So somebody could, you know, so when questions come to staff, and it could be a situation of where Mr. Bemis in this case isn't just communicating with the board, he's emailing several city staff, and what that does is a trigger. It's a trigger to somebody's job, and that's what we do, is we answer and we help the people. And so whoever gets it, if the city attorney gets it, I get it, the communication outreach director gets it, if Fritz gets it as communication manager, then we're getting actionable something that some person has asked us to do. And then we'd have to gather around and say, okay, who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to be doing this? Because that's what we do. That's our job. So it could have been just the mishap in terms of it going out, and I tried to respond directly just back to Mr. Bemis. I handle the FOIAs essentially for the city. I mean, we get several FOIAs. Some people say, do not send it to me by email. I don't want anybody to know in the atmosphere that I have it. Don't send it to anyone else. I only want it by paper. I don't want to create paper, and I don't want a disk. I want to come in, I want you to open the file and let me view it. Whatever they ask for. And we work to provide those documents or whatever we can for them. So that's what we do, is we serve the people. So if it comes to staff, we act.
We appreciate you doing that.
I have a question here. This population of Fayetteville is like 70,000 people.
73,580.
And then there's 20-some thousand at the university. Residents in Fayetteville.
Over that, they add about 2,000 every year.
Okay.
That's included in the 73.
Yeah. Well, actually, we have more than that. That's just under the census. Whoever talked to somebody that came to their
The
door.
point I'm trying to make here is that we're getting an inordinate amount of FO.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Too many of them.
Yeah.
I mean, heavens, there ought to be a limit.
And I respond directly.
67 hours?
Yeah, and I respond directly back with a person. And usually what happens is they say, I'd like these documents. And they say, here you go. They provide the documents. And then they're like, oh, thank you so much. I have my documents. But it doesn't come back for either the same documents or more, sort of over and over.
And it's also
But,
important to note the difference between a FOIA request and
Yes.
a request for service or complaint.
Yeah.
Because FOIA is a remedy available to any citizen in the state of Arkansas, as opposed to a
Or any other
request.
state, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Or any other state.
Or-
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But, are we being harassed
Utah.
here?
Okay.
Is this a form of harassment?
Well, I think Mr. Bemis says every right as a citizen to make these requests, whether they become burdensome or not. It's just
Okay.
whether or not they serve his
My heavens.
interest, I suppose.
Okay.
And we have
Thank
a
you.
lot of requests in the city, and they just go to different places. That might be on sidewalks, and so our transportation department might be the first one to get that. But they have so many staff, and so it might take a little while to get to that particular request for services. Or there might be something that where, ooh, that's in a private easement. We can't spend city money fixing somebody's private plumbing. And believe me, there are a lot of people who want city money spent on fixing their house. And it's like, I'm sorry, the law didn't let us do that.
It occurs to me with, 90,000 people in this area, that the city could be spending all of their time doing these requests.
Or I could spend that time building a communication department webpage.
Anyway, it doesn't seem fair to me.
I would like to ask a question about that,
About.
about what we've been talking about here.
Mhm.
But
I'm guessing that you only have had one citizen ask for those kinds of FOIs where it would cause you to spend 67 hours on it. I'm guessing that only one person has done that.
Requested those
extent-
topics to the.
To the extent that they've created 67 hours worth of work.
But that's not just for FOIA, and Mr. Pennington asked us to split them up. So it's also reviewing the complaints, having the complaints, deciding what staff does them. I mean,
We're
they're
talking
pretty
about
voluminous.
One person.
Yeah.
So
One person.
I would like for not every other citizen to be blamed for that sort of thing in the city. And while I'm kind of on the subject, I'd like to mention the fact that we, at one time in our government channel policy here, we had what I would consider to be a parallel to the FOI laws in that we had request clauses in the government channel policy where citizens could request meetings to be televised. And I think it's ironic that Dr. Stephen Smith here was the one that helped implement that when he was a member of the Telecommunication Board back in 2003. And I don't understand why we have reversed that sort of policy.
point of
That
personal
was very
preference, Mr.
depressing.
Chairman,
Mr. Smith?
all of this isn't on topic.
Well, it's
I
pretty
supported that. You're
Yes.
absolutely right, I did. And it went to city council twice and they voted it down.
close. They did not. It was in the policy. It was in the policy for 7 years.
All right.
Point of
It
order.
was in the policy for 7 years.
Your point of order is recognized. We're going to move on from the report and move to point 8, which is discussion of amendments to Article 6? Yeah, Articles 6 and 7 of the administrative rules.
Right. Everybody has a copy of this that Fritz read. And my question is just to discuss it. I think this is not a motion to make those changes, but things to consider. You may want to refer it to committee or you may want to act on it. I don't know. But there are a couple, just in reading it closely, that concern me. Beginning on Article 6, where it says citizen communications. We'll change that to public comments by Fayetteville residents. Because it wouldn't be just citizens and it wouldn't be people who drive up to Fort Smith because they have nothing else to do on Thursday night, or Utah. But it would make sure that Fayetteville residents have an opportunity to make public comments. On the Article 7 at the bottom, again, managed process by where Fayetteville residents can communicate their comments. On the next page, it says, and I don't know how to handle it, it says any other issue involving telecommunications or telecommunication services providers that have an impact. It seems to me that it's okay if they want to come in and talk about their cell phone service or whatever, but there's absolutely nothing the city or this board can do with regard to that. I mean, if we want to just have sort of a little drum circle where people can talk about the problems, we can do it. Again, changing to residents there. Under complaints from Fayetteville residents. And then all the way over at the end. Actually, where it says the board requires further, or there are possible determinations and votes on this. One is that we can request further information. One is that it's unfounded and no further action. Another is it's valid and no further action, but there's not or determined that it's valid and recommended to City Council, but there's not a provision for us to determine that it's valid and take action on it. And it seems to me that in things like complaints about censorship of content on the public access channel, I don't anticipate that the providers want to censor anything, but if they did and somebody felt they'd been unfairly restricted, we ought to be able to say, fix it. Put it on the air without having to, referring to the City Council is not the appropriate response. So there ought to be something that if we determine that it is valid, that we can take some action to remedy it. And finally, the last sentence, which says the process for appealing the action of the board, the city attorney has opined that there is no appeal from this board, that there's no right of appeal from our decisions to the City Council. I mean, it would be, if the City Council wants to hear somebody, it'd be a de novo presentation to the City Council if we can get on the agenda, but there's not an appeal by right from this board to any other body, because we're only an advisory board, so you can say we don't like their advice. So that's those are just things that I think could be clarified and might operate more efficiently. The only other thing that it's not on, I'll save it when we get later. I'm sorry.
Okay. Any discussion, motions, or other action? Mr. Gisler.
Is it contradictory to state that the Telecommunications Board can direct city staff or the public access operator through city staff to a particular action? Is it contradictory to the fact that statements that this board is advisory?
That's what I was thinking.
No, I think on hearing complaints, you think we don't have the authority to do that?
I've just been hearing over and over again from the city attorney and other people that this is an advisory board and
right,
doesn't have authority over the administration of the.
Right, but the thing that the city doesn't want to do is make content decisions, and that's why boards like this are established in the first place, to make sure that the government, elected officials, aren't making content decisions.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, let's ask the city attorney.
We can do that in conjunction with the review of the telecommunications ordinance.
Is that written in a way that we can just give straight to him?
No, that was one I was making up, sticking in between 3 and 4.
I could
We're gonna have to pull that from the
submit
minutes.
the imaginary. Okay.
I'd like to request permission to withdraw this from the agenda and get my thinking more clear and bring it back. I won't be at the November meeting, but I will be at the December meeting.
Any objection? Then it'll be withdrawn. And we will move to any other committee reports. Mine didn't. Smith, no internet committee report. Unfortunately, the agenda omitted the citizen comments section. At this time, it would be appropriate for any citizen comments, if there are any.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Resident comments, Mr. Smith made that point strongly in that discussion, and maybe it would be nice if we adopt that. In fact, we have had it in the agenda in previous times, resident as opposed to citizen. It does make a difference.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, what is the appropriate protocol for a member of the public to present? For example, Mr. Hilton brought up a request for items to be added to the agenda, and in previous meetings I've been hearing conversation back and forth that that's the appropriate protocol, rather than having just an open air session where anybody can walk up and say, well, I want to talk about, I don't like how these tables are arranged. What was on the agenda now, it says members of the public may approach board members prior to the meeting and request items to be added to the agenda, rather than there being an agenda item that is resident comments.
Right. But the administrative rules set the agenda order, and that requires us to do that .9, citizen communications by persons wishing to address matters not on the agenda. I think that would be something to discuss for a future amendment, but I think it would be within our rules it would be outside of our rules to not allow that to happen in the future.
I'll make sure that's added in there until such time it may be amended.
I just noticed that this evening, and it was something that we talked about, but it would be my ruling that we have to include that until that is no longer a point of our administrative rules.
Okay, thank you.
But hearing no citizen comments, we will move into agenda suggestions for the November meeting. Mr. Smith?
Although I won't be here. Something that has come out of this and the Freedom of Information Act request, there have been two things that past practices in this board that have made that problem even worse, and more so, taking a lot more time to come up with it. One is, apparently there was something called a forum where people got on and chatted about board business, and fortunately that has been doesn't exist. But that's taking board business out of the public view in too many ways of things we ought to be discussing at these meetings. The other is, I would say since I've been on this board, I average about 3 or 4 emails from Mr. Bemis. I'm sure all of you get copies of it too. And there's some rather, I don't want to use the word outrageous, fanciful assertions that I really want to respond to. And I probably did a couple of times, which then makes it some telecommunication board saying something and making it subject to Freedom of Information Act. If Mr. Bemis just sends in emails and nobody responds to them, then he'll already have a copy of them and won't need to get them, and it'll save the city for time to do legitimate work or respond to legitimate requests. And I don't know if there's anything in our administrative rules about not talking on email about business. It was one of Mr. Bemis's complaints that there's violation of the Freedom of Information Act because people were doing business on email. And I think that only applies to arguments, but not just to informational pieces. So I move that we behave.
Your point is well taken.
Yeah, and not be doing board business on emails.
Okay. So noted, and I'll work with Fritz to get together the agenda for the next meeting.
The November 17th meeting, gentlemen, will be held in room 219. Because of the holiday, we were not able to get this room. Another board has got reserved this room well in advance. However, December will be in here, and I have requested for the next year for us to continue to meet, for the city clerk, for us to continue to meet on the third Thursday of the month at 5:30 in room 326, right here.
Okay. Will you make sure this stuff gets transmitted to the city attorney?
Yes, I will.
Final announcement by me, it's time for a quarterly report to the city council. If there's no objection by the board, I'd like to prepare something, send it out, and if you've got any comments, let me know. I don't think it's an official action that's taken. Any
Move to
discussion?
authorize the chair to prepare the report. Submit it to the city council.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. I'll get that out in the next few days. Anything else? If not, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. We are adjourned.